They thought the galaxy called them legends until their fleet arrived. Recco arrived aboard the UEFS Iron Veil on the morning of Day 10. He came without ceremony, without guards, without the armored escort his own culture demanded for a commander of his rank. That was part of the surrender terms. He came as he was, alone, to sign the formal end of hostilities in the presence of the human admiral. His officers had argued against it. His personal advisors had called it humiliating. He had told them all to be quiet. He had lost. He would face what came with losing the same way he had always faced the rest of war, directly and without excuses. The docking bay of the Iron Veil was ordinary. No rows of soldiers standing at attention. No weapons displayed along the corridor walls. No music. A single human officer met him at the airlock and walked him through the ship in silence. The ship itself was the same as Hyena had described to the Council. Clean, functional, unremarkable to look at. The corridors were busy with crew members going about their work. Most of them barely glanced at him. He found that more unsettling than a formal military display would have been. A parade of soldiers was a performance. This was something else. This was a civilization that had just defeated the most powerful military force in the galactic arm, and was treating it as simply another task, now complete. Time to move on to the next one. He was brought to the same round-table meeting room where Hyena had sat 12 days earlier. Admiral Gion was already there. She stood to greet him. He had expected coldness, professional at best, contemptuous beneath the surface, the way victorious commanders always were, in his experience. They were gracious in public, and satisfied in private. It was one of the consistent facts of military command across every civilization he had ever encountered. Gion did not seem satisfied. She seemed, as far as he could read her expression, exactly the same as she appeared in every report he had received about her. Calm, attentive, present. "Commander Recco," she said, "please sit." He sat. The documents were already on the table, formally prepared, clearly organized. He read through them carefully, not because he expected a trap, but because he had spent his entire career reading documents carefully, and he was not going to stop now. The terms were strict but not crushing. The Drevkan Dominion would withdraw from all absorbed territories. Reparations would be made to the 4 civilizations the Dominion had consumed. The Dominion's military would be capped in size for the next 30 years. A monitoring framework would be established. What was not in the terms was also notable. There was no demand for Drevkan land, no annexation of Dominion territory, no tribute to humanity. No clause requiring Drevkan citizens to kneel before some symbol of human authority. The terms were designed, clearly and deliberately, to end the aggression and provide restitution to those harmed by it, not to punish the Drevkan people for the choices of their military leadership. Recco looked up from the documents. "You are not taking anything," he said. "We don't want your territory," Gion said simply. "You could," he said. "You have the Force." "Having the Force and using it are different decisions," she replied. "We used Force to stop you. We're not interested in becoming you." Then he signed the documents. By the time Hyena received confirmation that the surrender had been signed, she was already writing the formal report that Elder Sorum would present to the full Galactic Assembly. It was, she had decided, going to be the most honest report she had ever written. Not diplomatic, not carefully softened, honest. She wrote about what she had seen when she first crossed into human territory, the organized vastness of it, the shipyards and the fleet, and the traffic control system that handled it all with calm efficiency. She wrote about the meeting on the Iron Veil, about GN's quiet directness, and Inho's 11-day estimate. She wrote about watching the battle feeds with Elder Sorum, and the strange experience of seeing an 11,000-ship war conducted with the focused precision of a surgical procedure. She wrote about what the surrender terms contained and what they deliberately did not contain. She ended the report with a paragraph she rewrote 3 times before she was satisfied with it. The Galactic Assembly has spent 80 years telling stories about humanity based on one battle, fought long ago, by a civilization that was then at the very beginning of what it would become. Those stories were not false. The humans at Kepler were remarkable. But they were remarkable the way a seedling is remarkable. What stands in human space today is not a seedling. The Assembly should understand, clearly and without comfort, that what we asked to borrow as a symbol was never a symbol. It was always the real thing. We simply had not been paying attention. She sent the report to Sorum and closed her terminal. The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session 4 days after the surrender. The chamber on Orath Prime was the largest in the known galaxy, built to hold representatives from 62 civilizations, with observation galleries that could seat thousands. It was full. Every seat was taken. Even civilizations that rarely participated in assembly sessions had sent delegates. The Drevkin surrender had moved through galactic communication networks at the speed that truly significant news moves, which is to say, almost instantly, because everyone passes it on the moment they receive it. Elder Sorum presented the motion to formally invite humanity into the Galactic Assembly as a senior member. He did not give a long speech. He simply presented the facts of the last 12 days and let them speak for themselves. The vote was taken. 61 civilizations voted in favor. 1 abstained, a small civilization on the far rim that apparently hadn't been following the news very closely and wasn't certain what they were voting on. No one voted against. Haina delivered the formal invitation to Admiral Gion on Earth's surface 3 weeks later. She had been to many planets. She had landed on gas giant moons and rocky desert worlds and perfectly engineered habitats built in asteroid belts. She had visited Orath Prime's manicured capital city and the vast industrial moon stations of the Sulani. She thought she had a reasonably complete picture of what advanced civilizations looked like. Earth was different. She understood, intellectually, that the planet had large bodies of open water. She knew it had an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, and a fairly narrow temperature range, and significant land vegetation. She had read all of this. Reading it had not prepared her for what it looked, smelled, and sounded like to stand on the surface and experience it directly. The sheer amount of life everywhere, in the ground, in the air, in the water, growing up the sides of buildings, in cities that hummed with human activity, was overwhelming in a way she had not anticipated. She stood in a courtyard outside Fleet Headquarters with the invitation document in her hands, and Admiral Gion beside her, and tried to describe what she was feeling. "It's very loud," she finally said. Gion smiled, not the brief professional smile from their first meeting. A real one. "Yes," she agreed, "it always is." Haina presented the invitation. There was no ceremony. Gion had specifically requested no ceremony, which Haina had passed along to the Assembly Planning Committee with minimal surprise. The acceptance was filed, transmitted to Orath Prime, and entered into the official Assembly record. It was done. On the shuttle back to her diplomatic vessel, Haina looked out the window as the shuttle climbed through Earth's atmosphere. Below, the planet got smaller, the cities, the oceans, the green and brown and blue of it all, compressing into something that could be held in a single view. She had spent months now watching humanity from a distance and up close, and she was still working out how to hold all of it together. She thought about the old Kepler recording. 1 ship, 6 hours, 19 enemies destroyed before the Alliance retreated. She had thought she understood that story. She had studied it for 4 years, and believed she had a genuine understanding of what it meant. What it said about this species, their stubbornness, their refusal, the way they simply would not stop. Now she understood that she had only understood part of it. The stubbornness was real. The refusal was real. But what she had missed, what every civilization in the galaxy had missed, was the patience. The Kepler ship had fought because it had to. But the civilization that built that ship had spent the next 80 years doing something harder than fighting. It had spent 80 years being quiet, being disciplined, building and training and preparing, day after day, year after year, without anyone watching and without any recognition. That, she thought, was the part of the story no one had been telling, and now the galaxy knew. She leaned back in her seat as the shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere and the dark of space opened up around her. Somewhere out there, in the organized lanes of human space, thousands of ships continued their quiet, efficient movement. Jian was back at her desk. Inho was already reviewing the next set of operational maps. Daeho was standing at his viewport, looking out at the fleet. The legends the galaxy had whispered for 80 years were not wrong. They were just the beginning of the story. The rest of it was still being written. H1, they thought the galaxy called them legends until their fleet arrived. HR. The Drevkan Supreme Commander's name was Rekko, and he had never lost a war. He had fought 11 of them. He had won all 11. Not narrowly, decisively. He was the kind of commander whose enemies tended to stop existing as organized military forces within a predictable time frame, and whose reputation in the Dominion was somewhere between celebrated general and living monument. His officers were loyal to the point of stubbornness. His fleet was enormous, experienced, and accustomed to winning. When the human ultimatum arrived on his command ship, Rekko read it once, set it down, and laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, deep and long, the kind that fills a room. His officers laughed with him. The message was read aloud to the bridge crew, and the bridge crew laughed too. The humans, the old legend. The species that had done something impressive in one corridor 80 years ago, and then vanished into silence like a dying fire. And now, apparently, they had sent a formal written document informing the Drevkan Dominion to withdraw from Velthari territory or face military response. Face military response. From a civilization that had been functionally invisible for 4 decades. Rekko composed his reply personally. He kept it very short. Come then. 3 words. He thought the brevity was appropriately insulting. He transmitted it, poured himself a drink, and went back to reviewing his expansion plans. He received the first damage report 19 hours later. The Voss Corridor, one of his primary choke points, home to a significant fleet staging post and a network of supply depots, had been hit. Not skirmished, not probed. Hit. The station reported contact with a human fleet force, and then went silent. Rekko's fleet admiral in the region confirmed. The staging post was gone. Not damaged, gone. 43 Drevkan vessels destroyed in a 2-hour engagement. Rekko put down his drink. He called in his tactical officers and had them explain what happened. They explained it badly, because none of them fully understood it. The human fleet had not attacked in any formation the Drevkan tactical database recognized. They moved in groups that shifted and reorganized in real time, covering each other at angles that seemed to anticipate Drevkan countermoves, before the Drevkan commanders had made them. When the Drevkan fleet tried to consolidate and push back, the humans simply weren't where the Drevkan expected them to be anymore. Pull the reserve fleet from Sector 4, Rekko said. Reinforce the Orov passage. If they're going for the choke points, they'll move there next. The order went out. Captain Inho received the Drevkan repositioning data from his intelligence officer 30 minutes after the Drevkan order was issued. He was standing at his operations table aboard the lead carrier of the 2nd Fleet Group, surrounded by the quiet, precise activity of his command staff. He looked at the data for about 8 seconds. "They're moving to protect the Orath Passage," he said. "Yes, sir," his intelligence officer confirmed. "Good." Inho was quiet for a moment. Then, "We are not going to the Orath Passage." He redirected his fleet group toward Drevcon Sector 7, the relay station cluster instead. In his assessment, the Drevcon had now made a significant mistake. They had pulled forces from one choke point to protect another, which meant the third choke point was temporarily lighter than it should have been, which meant it could be taken faster than planned. He updated the operational timeline accordingly. He sent the revision to Admiral Gion's command center with a single note. Day 3, not 4. Day 3. The Orath Passage was hit not by Inho's group, but by Commander Deho, who had been moving in from the outer system with the Third Fleet element. Deho had spent 11 years watching this fleet grow, and another several months specifically preparing for this campaign. He did not fight with aggression the way some commanders did, not with the intention of overwhelming an enemy with force. He fought with precision, the way a surgeon works, cutting exactly where it needs to be cut, and leaving everything else untouched. The Orath Passage engagement lasted 6 hours. The Drevcan reserve force that had been repositioned there was large, and fought back with real determination. Deho lost 4 ships. The Drevcan lost 212. He filed his operational report and moved to secure the passage. On Orath Prime, Ambassador Haina sat beside Elder Sorum in the Council's private monitoring room and watched the battle feeds come in from Drevcon space. The room was small and dim, and full of the soft sound of data terminals. Other council members came and went, but Sorum had been there since the first reports arrived, and Haina had stayed with him. Neither of them had spoken very much. The scale of what was happening was difficult to hold in the mind all at once. It wasn't just the victories, it was the speed. The Drevcon, a civilization that had conquered 11 others, were not simply being defeated. They were being systematically disassembled, piece by piece, with a calm and organized thoroughness that suggested the humans had looked at this problem from every angle before they started moving, and already knew exactly how it would end. "They told me 11 days, Haina said at one point. Sorum looked at her. "Captain Inho, in the meeting on the Iron Veil, he said 11 days. She paused. "It's day 3. Both outer choke points are gone." Sorum was quiet for a long moment. "What is your current estimate?" Haina looked at the tactical map. 8 days, she said. "Maybe less." Rekko, day 5, was not laughing. He had relocated his command ship twice. His communication network was fractured. The loss of the Sector 7 relay stations meant his fleet groups were operating with delays that turned coordinated movements into isolated ones. He tried to pull his forces together into a single consolidated mass, which was the classic response to this kind of threat. A massive combined force was harder to pick apart than separated groups. The humans did not engage his consolidated fleet directly. They simply moved around it, cutting off its supply lines with a speed and precision that left his logistics officers describing the situation in terms that ranged from alarming to catastrophic. A fleet that couldn't be supplied, couldn't fight indefinitely. Rekko knew this. Every commander knew this. He called an emergency council with his senior admirals on day 6. The admirals were not as calm as they had been a week ago. They had all lost ships. Several had been in the engagements personally. They had never, any of them, fought an enemy that seemed to always know where they were going to be and was already somewhere else by the time they got there. The human fleet didn't feel like a military force. It felt like a force of nature. Impersonal and inevitable, responding to Drevcan movements the way water responds to a hand pushing through it. "Their numbers," said one admiral, his voice careful. "Do we have a current count?" The intelligence officer gave the number. The room went quiet, in a way that was different from before. Before, the quiet had been the kind that follows a good joke. Now, it was the kind that follows news you were not expecting, and do not know how to process. Rekko sat very still. He had thought, everyone had thought, that the humans were bluffing with numbers, that the fleet appearing on initial scans was a stretched formation designed to look larger than it was. Military commanders did that. You spread your forces to cover more ground, and the enemy's sensors read it as more ships than you actually had. But the humans were not spread thin. Their fleet was operating in multiple locations simultaneously, and was still showing reserve groups that had not moved. Reserves that were larger than his current consolidated force. "They're not using everything," said one admiral quietly. It was not really a question. "No," the intelligence officer confirmed. "Current estimate is they have committed approximately 60% of their total force." The silence this time lasted a long time. Inho's note to Admiral Jian on day 9 was also short. "Surrender coordinates transmitted. Awaiting your instruction." Jian read it in the strategic center on the lunar base. Around her, officers were monitoring the feeds quietly, professionally, the way they had been trained to do. There was no cheering, no celebration, just the work, continuing. She typed back, "Accept surrender. Immediately begin organizing humanitarian relief convoys for liberated system populations. Full medical and supply deployment. No delays." She set the tablet down and looked at the star map. The red glow of the Drevkan Dominion had contracted. It would contract further as the terms were processed. The 14 Velthari systems were already being signaled as clear. 8 days, Hannah had estimated. It had taken 9. Jian allowed herself one small, quiet moment to acknowledge that. Then, she went back to work. They thought the galaxy called them legends until their fleet arrived. The UEFS Iron Veil was not the largest ship in Earth's unified fleet, but it was the one Admiral Jian had chosen as her command vessel, and after 11 years aboard it, the ship felt like an extension of herself. It was not decorated the way alien command ships tended to be. No ceremonial banners, no carved reliefs of old victories, no gold or silver plating on the walls of important corridors. The Iron Veil was clean and functional and efficient, and every surface that wasn't a viewport or a control panel was the same flat gray as everything else. Officers who visited it for the first time sometimes found it cold. Officers who worked on it for a month understood that it was something better than warm. It was focused. Haina walked aboard through a standard docking collar with a single aide beside her, escorted by 2 human officers who were polite and professional, and offered her water before she had even sat down. She had expected ceremony, a formal reception perhaps, some kind of display of military strength, a flyover, a row of soldiers in dress uniforms, something that said, "Look how powerful we are." That was how it was typically done when one military civilization received an ambassador from another. You showed your strength first, so the guest understood their position. Instead, she was led to a simple meeting room with a round table, 4 chairs, a wide viewport looking out at the fleet, and a tray of food she didn't recognize, but which smelled surprisingly good. Admiral Jian was already seated when she arrived. Jian stood to greet her, which Haina knew from her studies was a human gesture of respect, and offered her hand. Haina shook it, having practiced the gesture beforehand. Jian smiled briefly, the way a person smiles when they notice preparation, and appreciate it without making a large show of the fact. "Ambassador Haina," she said, "welcome. Please sit." Jian herself was not what Haina had pictured. She was not especially tall. She did not project the kind of loud physical authority that many military leaders across the galaxy used as their primary tool. She was calm and still in the way that deep water is calm and still. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything that is happening far beneath the surface. Across the table sat Fleet Captain Inho. He was younger than Jian by perhaps a decade, with a quiet face and eyes that moved over things very carefully. the way someone moves a hand over a surface they're trying to read. He nodded when introduced, and then said nothing further. He had a copy of the Drevcan tactical data on the table in front of him, and he was reading it the way a person reads something they are already beginning to solve. Hena took a breath and delivered her message. She explained the situation with the Drevcan Dominion, the ultimatum, the 14 systems, the Velthari Council's concern that direct military resistance would result in complete destruction. She explained the Council's proposal that humanity's visible participation as an ally would serve as a deterrent, that the legend of human military capability, renewed by Earth's reemergence from silence, might cause the Drevcan to recalculate. She was careful and precise, and she used the exact language Sorum had coached her to use. When she finished, Jian was quiet for a moment. "So the Council's hope," she said, "is that we show up, and the Drevcan gets scared and go home." "In essence," Hena said carefully. "Yes." Jian nodded, not dismissively, but thoughtfully. "Tell me about the Drevcan fleet." Hena pulled up the numbers. The Dominion maintained roughly 10,000 active warships. Their weapons technology was advanced, not the most advanced in the galaxy, but well above average. Their commanders were experienced. They had fought and won 11 major conflicts in the past 30 years. Jian listened to all of this without expression. Then she slid a data tablet across the table. Hena picked it up. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. Then it took her another moment to believe it. The numbers listed were inventory figures, Earth's current active fleet count, broken down by ship class. Then she read it again. She set the tablet down carefully. "Why?" she said, and her voice was steady, even though she was not feeling steady. "Did you hide all of this?" Jian looked at her without any particular expression. "We didn't hide it. Nobody asked." Hena stared at her. "We stopped broadcasting," Jian continued, "because we found that broadcasting our movements and capabilities was strategically unwise. Other civilizations react to visible strength, sometimes with fear, sometimes with preemptive aggression. Silence gave us room to grow without interference." She paused. "We weren't hiding from the galaxy. We were simply not performing for it." Captain Inho spoke then for the first time since the introductions. He didn't look up from the tactical maps. "The Drevcan used 3 choke points," he said. His voice was even and unhurried. "The Voss Corridor, the Orath Passage, and the Relay Station Cluster at Drevcan Sector 7. Their entire supply chain, fleet communication, and reinforcement logistics run through these 3 points." He finally looked up. If those 3 points were removed simultaneously, their fleet would be divided into pieces. Those pieces could be dealt with individually. He glanced back down. "I estimate 11 days. Hena blinked. 11 days, she repeated. "For full operational conclusion," Inho said. "The initial phase would be faster." She looked at Jian. Jian was watching her with that same calm expression. "You're not talking about a deterrent," Hena said slowly. "You're talking about actually fighting them." "Ambassador," Jian said, "we're happy to serve as a deterrent if that's what the Council wants. We can move a portion of the fleet to the Velthari border, and see if the Drevcan reconsider." She folded her hands on the table. "But I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty. In my professional assessment, the Drevcan will not stop because of a show of force. They have never stopped for that reason before. They will test us, and when they test us, we will respond." She paused. "I would rather have that conversation now, clearly, than have it later under worse conditions." Hena sat with that for a long moment. "What do you need from the Council?" she asked. "Permission to operate in the affected territory. Support and logistics were available, and confirmation that the Council understands we will not engage halfway." Jian's voice was not hard, but it was very clear. "If we move, we finish it." Hena transmitted her report to Elder Sorum that evening from her private quarters aboard the Iron Veil. She had prepared, before leaving Orath Prime, 6 different versions of this report. For 6 different scenarios. She had not prepared a version for this scenario, because this scenario had not occurred to her as a realistic possibility. She recorded it plainly and honestly, without trying to soften it. The humans were not what the Council had imagined. They were not a legendary ghost, impressive in memory, but modest in reality. They were not a symbol to be borrowed. They were a fully operational military civilization, of a scale that she was still struggling to fully process. Led by commanders who spoke about 11-day campaigns against 10,000 ship fleets, the way a builder speaks about a job they have already measured and priced. The legends the galaxy told about humanity, she wrote, were not exaggerations. They were simply based on humans at their weakest point, fighting with their oldest and smallest tools, before 4 decades of quiet and focused and relentless preparation had turned them into whatever they were now. She ended the transmission and sat in the dark of the room for a while, looking out the small viewport at the lights of the fleet outside. She thought about what Elder Sorum had said before she left, that sometimes the story is enough. That legends, carefully displayed, could stop a war before it started. She thought about what she had seen today. She thought about Inho's voice, calm and flat, saying, 11 days. The story, she suspected, was no longer the most powerful thing humanity had. Not even close. They thought the galaxy called them legends, until their fleet arrived. The Drevkan ambassador arrived on Orath Prime without an invitation. That alone told Elder Sorum everything he needed to know about the Drevkan and how seriously they took the rest of the galaxy. Their ship, massive, black-hulled, shaped like a clenched fist, dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above the planet's capital city, ignoring every traffic protocol and approach lane that existed. Their ambassador, a tall, gray-skinned creature named Vreth, walked into the council chamber without waiting to be announced, and sat down at the table as though he owned it. Sorum watched all of this, and kept his expression perfectly neutral. Vreth placed a data chip on the table and slid it to the center without speaking. One of the council's aides picked it up, read what was on it, and turned slightly pale. "The Drevkan Dominion," Vreth said, his voice a deep, flat rumble, "is expanding its territorial boundary. The space currently designated as Velthari Sovereign Territory along the 4th Corridor will be absorbed into the Dominion within 90 days. The Council is invited to begin withdrawal procedures at its earliest convenience." The chamber went very quiet. Sorum picked up the data chip and read it himself. It was exactly what the aide's expression had told him it was. Not a negotiation, not a request, a notification. The Drevkan were not asking for Velthari space. They were informing the Council that they were taking it. "You are asking us to abandon 14 populated systems," said Representative Bell, his voice tight. "Those are Velthari citizens." "I am not asking anything," Vrek said simply. "I am informing." He stood, straightened his coat, and left. The council chamber erupted the moment he was gone. Voices overlapped from every seat. Representatives from 6 different civilizations spoke at once, some in fear, some in anger, most in a rising panic that Sorum found understandable but unhelpful. He waited. He let them shout. He had found over the years that frightened people needed to exhaust themselves before they could think clearly. Eventually the voices died down, and all eyes turned to him. "We cannot fight the Drevkan," he said plainly. "I will not pretend otherwise. Their fleet outnumbers the combined military forces of every civilization at this table. Any direct engagement would end in our destruction." Silence. "However," he continued, "there is another option." He gestured to the aide, who brought up a holographic map of the galaxy. Several star systems in one distant corner glowed a soft blue. Far from the Drevkan border, separated from the rest of known civilization by a wide stretch of quiet, mostly empty space. "The humans," said Representative Bell, very quietly. "The humans," Sorum confirmed. The mood in the room shifted. Not to confidence. It was too early for confidence. But the word had landed with weight, the way it always did. The Kepler corridor, the single ship, the 6-hour battle. Everyone in that room had grown up knowing the story. Everyone in the galaxy knew the story. "They've been silent for decades," said another representative. "We don't even know if they still exist." "They exist," Sorum said. "Our deep-range sensors have confirmed low-level activity in their territory. They are simply not communicating outward." He paused. "I propose we send an ambassador, not to request military assistance, not yet. Merely to make contact. To remind the galaxy, and specifically the Drevkin, that humanity is still present. That we have allies who have historically proven difficult to remove." "You want to use the legend," Bell said. "Not an accusation. Just a statement." "I want to remind the Drevkin that legends exist for a reason," Sorum said. "Sometimes the story is enough." The vote was taken. It passed 7-2. The ambassador selected for the mission was a young woman named Hyena. She was, by most measures, an unusual choice. She was not a senior diplomat. She was not a decorated soldier or a political heavyweight. She was 29 years old, junior in rank, and had spent the last 4 years writing academic papers on human culture and history. That was precisely why Sorum had chosen her. She knew the humans better than anyone else on Orath Prime. She had studied their language, their habits, their history. She had read every transmission they had ever sent before going silent. She had watched the Kepler recording, not 300 times like the Council, but closer to 1,000. She was also, Sorum had noticed, unusually calm for someone her age. Good diplomats learn to be calm. Great ones were born that way. Haina stood in the docking bay beside her small scout vessel and listened to Elder Sorum's final instructions with her hands folded behind her back. "We are not sending you to negotiate," he said. "We are sending you to look, assess their current state, determine whether they are capable of serving as a visible deterrent, a flag we can plant beside our own to make the Drevkan hesitate." He looked at her steadily. "I expect you will find a modest civilization, perhaps proud, perhaps still skilled, but diminished by isolation. Do not let them feel like a tool." "And if they are more than modest?" Haina asked. Sorum paused for just a moment. "Then use your judgment," he said. She boarded her ship and was gone within the hour. The journey to the edge of human space took 11 days. Haina spent most of it reviewing everything she knew. She memorized current estimates of human population, guessed at fleet numbers based on decades-old data, reviewed communication protocols. She prepared 6 different opening statements, depending on what kind of reception she might receive: hostile, indifferent, cautious, curious, warm, or bureaucratic. She was not prepared for what actually happened. Her ship crossed the unmarked boundary of human territory and immediately received the polite, automated transmission. It informed her that her vessel had been scanned, identified as non-threatening, and assigned an approach corridor. It gave her traffic instructions. As though ships passed through here every day, Haina looked at her pilot, and her pilot looked back at her. She followed the corridor. What she saw as she traveled deeper into the system made her stop speaking entirely for almost 10 minutes. She simply sat in the cockpit and looked. Orbital shipyards that dwarfed any structure she had ever seen, hanging in space like small moons, lit up from the inside, visibly active with construction and movement. Fleet formations that moved in organized lanes the way ground vehicles moved on city roads. Defense platforms spaced at mathematically perfect intervals from the outer edge of the system inward. And ships. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Her communication board chimed. A calm human voice came through, professional, unhurried. Ambassador Haina of the Velthari Council, this is Sol System Traffic Control. We've been expecting contact from your direction for some time. Admiral Jian sends her regards and asks if you would like an escort to Fleet Headquarters. Haina's mouth was dry. She pressed the transmit button. Yes, she said. Please. She reached for her personal log and began recording. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. I have entered human territory, she said quietly. Elder Sorum's assessment was that I would find a modest, possibly diminished civilization. I need to update that assessment immediately. What I am looking at is not modest. I don't have a word for what I am looking at. She paused, staring out at the vast field of warships gleaming in the light of humanity's sun. I think, she said slowly, that we have made a very significant mistake in our assumptions. They thought the galaxy called them legends, until their fleet arrived. The old recording was grainy and full of static, but every member of the Velthari Council had watched it more times than they could count. In the recording, a single human warship, battered, smoking, half its hull torn open, floated at the center of the Kepler corridor. Around it, like a wall of steel and fire, sat 47 ships of the Dravan Alliance. The human ship was alone. It had no backup. Its engines were barely working. Any other species would have surrendered in the first 10 minutes. The human ship fought for 6 hours. It destroyed 19 Dravan vessels before the Alliance finally retreated. Not because the human ship had won, not because reinforcements arrived. The Alliance retreated because their commanders were afraid. Afraid of one ship, one species that simply refused to stop. That was 80 years ago. Elder Sorum of the Velthari Council sat in his tall chair and watched the recording end for what felt like the 1,000th time. The room was quiet. Around the long oval table sat representatives from 9 different civilizations. The Velthari, the Orath, the Suleni, the Prex, and 5 others. All of them watching the same crackling footage with the same expression. A mixture of awe and relief. Relief that the humans were apparently gone. They haven't transmitted anything in 40 years, said Representative Bell of the Suleni, his 4 arms folded neatly across his chest. Not a trade signal, not a border beacon, nothing. 43 years, Elder Sorum corrected quietly. Does it matter? Bell asked. They are silent. Whatever they were, they are finished now. Sorum did not respond. He had learned over a very long career that silence was rarely a sign of weakness. Sometimes it was a sign of preparation. But he kept that thought to himself and let the others believe what they wanted to believe. Far across the galaxy, in a solar system that the rest of the universe had mostly stopped paying attention to, a man named Deho stood at the wide viewport of his command bridge and looked out at something that would have made the Velthari Council go completely pale. Ships, thousands of them. They stretched out across the dark in every direction, lined up in formation, moving in slow, organized patterns, their running lights blinking like a second field of stars. Destroyers the size of city blocks, carriers so large they blocked out the light of nearby moons, frigates and cruisers and support vessels and specialized ships that had no equivalent in any alien navy because no alien navy had ever fought to build them. Deho had been a commander in Earth's unified fleet for 22 years. He had watched this fleet grow from a few hundred vessels to what it was now. He still found it difficult to look at without feeling something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to the feeling a person gets when they stand at the edge of a very high cliff and understand, fully, what they are capable of. He turned away from the viewport and walked to his operations table, where his second officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rena, was reviewing the latest intelligence reports. "Anything new from the outer listening posts?" he asked. Rena pulled up a holographic display. Blue text scrolled across it in neat columns. "The Valthari Council met again yesterday. They played the Kepler recording." She paused. "Again." Deho almost smiled. "How many times does that make?" "Our analysts stopped counting at 300. Rena set the display down. "They're scared of what we were 80 years ago. They have no idea what we are now." Deho nodded slowly. That was, he knew, entirely by design. The decision to go silent had not been made by any single person or government. It had grown, slowly and carefully, from a simple understanding that spread through Earth's leadership over decades. The galaxy watched everything. Every transmission, every trade route, every military movement. As long as humanity broadcast its growth openly, the rest of the galaxy would eventually decide to do something about it. Out of fear, if nothing else. So Earth had gone quiet. They stopped broadcasting. They pulled back their border beacons. They let the outer colonies go dark from the galaxy's perspective, while continuing to thrive and expand inward, building deeper into their own territory where alien sensors couldn't easily reach. And while the galaxy slowly convinced itself that humanity had faded, had perhaps destroyed itself in some internal war, Earth had spent 43 years doing exactly one thing: building. Admiral Jian was in charge of what they had built. She was not a loud woman. She did not make speeches or hold ceremonies. She had been running Earth's unified fleet for 11 years, and in that time she had turned it from a powerful military force into something that even she found difficult to fully describe. Not just in terms of ships and weapons, though the numbers there were staggering. In terms of readiness, coordination, the ability of 10,000 ships to act as a single thinking organism, responding to threats in real time, with a speed and flexibility no enemy had ever encountered. She stood now in the vast strategic center of fleet headquarters on Earth's lunar base, surrounded by holographic star maps and the quiet, focused activity of hundreds of officers doing their work. She was reading a report that had just come in from one of their deep space listening posts near the Valthari border. The Drevkon Dominion was moving again. She had been watching the Drevkon for 3 years. They were an expansionist civilization, not unusual in the galaxy, but dangerous in the specific way that expansion combined with brutality tends to be dangerous. They had absorbed 4 smaller civilizations in the past decade, not conquered, absorbed, which meant the populations of those civilizations no longer existed as independent peoples. They had been folded into the Dominion, their cultures erased, their resources stripped, their soldiers conscripted. Now the Drevkan were pushing toward the Valthari border, and beyond the Valthari, toward the edges of human space. Jian set the report down. She thought about the Valthari Council, watching their old recording of a broken human ship fighting 47 enemies alone. She thought about what they believed humanity was now: a ghost, a memory, a legend used to frighten children and inspire stories. She picked up a communication tablet and typed a short note to Commander Deho. "Move the outer fleet to observation position Delta. Passive monitoring only. I want eyes on the Drevkan border within the week." She set the tablet down and looked back at the star map. The Drevkan Dominion glowed red across a wide section of the galactic arm. It looked powerful. She had seen the full numbers of Earth's fleet displayed on this same map. The Drevkan territory, for all its red glow, was not particularly large. Jian was not a person who felt pride easily, but standing in the quiet hum of fleet headquarters, looking at what 43 years of silent, disciplined work had produced, she felt something very close to it. The galaxy had built legends about humanity based on one old battle. They had no idea. And soon, she thought, soon, they were going to find out.